Okay, this week at The Agenda saw a potential tipping point for women in India, the true cost of a consumer society, and a provincial political leader's so-called straight talk. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with an examination of the difficulty Canada's First Nations have balancing tradition and life in our modern world. I suspect you all saw Jeffrey Simpson's column in the newspaper in the Globe and Mail over the weekend, and I want to read just a snippet of it here, and then Terry, I'll get you to comment on this first and we can finish up on this. It's called Living in a Dream Palace. And Jeffrey writes, too many communities remain within the dream palace, hungering for a return to a more separate existence, even if the lands on which they sit are, and likely always will be, of marginal economic value. At Awapiskat, Chief Spence's community is subject to severe flooding, given its location on the James Bay Plain, but it refused to consider moving further upriver or near Timmins, where there might be employment opportunities. To imagine that isolated communities of 1,000 or so people can be vibrant and self-sustaining, capable of discharging the panoply of responsibilities of quote-unquote sovereignty, is to live within the dream palace of memory. Let's go around on this. Terry Glavin, your comments on that.
It's very rare that I see something of a kernel in a Jeffrey Simpson column that I agree with. I do see something of a kernel in that column that I've actually heard Aboriginal people articulate time and time and time again. One of the things about this phenomenon, whether it's a movement or not, I'm hopeful that it might be. One of the things I've noticed about this phenomenon is there is a bit of that dream palace stuff that permeates most of these events, in that, a lot of the oxygen for this has been provided by the sort of activist constituencies that were anti-globalization and occupists. And one thing I find a little bit disconcerting is that there's kind of an Indian in the cupboard thing going on here, that Aboriginal people are perfectly okay if they show up and they do smudge ceremonies and they're in their regalia and they chant and they drum and they talk about sacred this and sacred that. But God forbid should Aboriginal people not only put up roadblocks, but decide how to lift the roadblocks, who gets to come in, what logging companies, mining companies will be allowed to operate on the traditional territory, under what terms and conditions, who gets the jobs, how much do they pay, what happens to the product, where does it go. These are extremely difficult, all of the difficult challenges that face Aboriginal communities in the militant assertion of their rights to self-government and their rights to ownership and jurisdiction over their lands. And I agree, there's a lot of Turtle Island, Mother Earth, I've heard it before. And I mean, I hope Russell is right and I'm wrong on this. I hope that a movement might actually emerge, that some young Aboriginal people might actually assert some leadership in the vanguard of this and start asserting some discipline around some identifiable and achievable goals. But right now, yeah, I think there actually is a lot of the sort of fairyland dream palace, let's dress up and bang drums. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that too. I think it's really encouraging for a lot of young Aboriginal people to see that there's actually a great deep reservoir of support and sympathy and empathy among the non-Aboriginal communities. That stuff is fine, but it's got to move on from here. Otherwise, it's just going to collapse under the weight of its many contradictions.
Let me get Cynthia's view on Jeffrey Simpson's piece. The Dream Palace of Memory is what he called it.
Native people in Canada see themselves as different in some very fundamental ways, whether it's philosophy or spiritual practices or their belief systems in when it comes to the world around them. And they've maintained that. It's 2013, and they've still maintained that. So that should tell people that it's a fundamental sense of who they are. It's not something that they're dreaming up or they're in memory of. They really do want to maintain the integrity of their cultures and their communities, their languages.
And they want to say that. It's the issue of whether or not there is too much stuck in the past and not enough recognition of today's realities.
No, we have people, sitting at this table who have doctorates and who are working in universities, and we have people working in the mines that are working alongside everybody else, and we have people living in Europe, and we have people flying airplanes. I mean, the realities are that we are as diverse in our society as anybody is diverse in their societies. And I think that the problem is that there's never been any kind of real respect for the fact that we've asserted time and time again there were treaties made in this country, there was a relationship that was formed and was never really upheld. The lands that we sit on and continue to live on need to be in our hands and protected. There's no respect for that. Our women are treated marginally. There's rape going on in Thunder Bay right now because of, in the name of. There's a lot of things that are going on that that want to remove people from their lands and from their resources. As far as I'm concerned, it's a four-letter word that keeps us divided, and it's land.
Hayden, your view?
I think that the Simpson column's unfortunate on the one hand, I mean, I guess for some people, Native people asserting their rights is scary, maybe a nightmare as opposed to a dream for people like Simpson. But, on the other hand, there's some merit to what he has to say in the sense that we haven't fully defined what Indigenous nationhood means. I think if anything important comes out of I Don't Know More, it's that nations start coming together and start articulating their vision of national governments and national movements and negotiating with Canada based on a nation-to-nation basis. I mean, maybe Simpson is right that work hasn't been done yet, but it is being done. We're working on it, and if anything comes out of I Don't Know More, I hope it's that.
I think for what it's worth, Jeffrey Simpson would be the last guy to say that there isn't a long, proud, 2 minutes to go, long and proud tradition of many Aboriginal communities in this country that make us part of what we are all here. But I think he's saying that there's too much stuck in the past in completely unsustainable communities. And Pamela, he thinks people have got to stop living in this dream palace of memory. Does he have a point?
No, he doesn't have a point. Memory and history and culture and tradition is what makes all of our societies. I mean, you wouldn't have a constitution. I mean, that's based on all of your many centuries of laws and values and principles, and the same for us. Why should Canadians be able to live the good life, but not First Nations the way we want to live the good life? And it's really a myth to think that someone's location prohibits them from living the good life the way they want to. We lived here since time immemorial, and we lived here just fine. There's a mine outside of Attawapiskat. It's not that there's no resources in these northern communities. And now that you can see, some of the richest resources in this country are in the north. So it's not that there's no resources or there's no employment. It's that First Nations don't have access to their own lands and resources. That's what the real issue is.
I'd like to know how you first heard about this appalling episode.
On the internet, because it was late at night, and I almost never log off, and very soon it was all on Twitter and all over the news. And then it was waking up to the reality as it unfolded. I have to say it was extremely shocking, and that is not to say that we haven't heard of rapes in India before. I mean, there are really a lot of reportings, especially those of us who keep watching the women's movement, the information that comes out of different women's movements. But this was shocking, I think, in part because of the brutality, but in part also because of the way it was projected through the media. And this is not a critique of the media, that how quickly the news spread of this particular event, and how quickly the young, particularly the young women, mobilized to protest against it.
Rape is a problem in India.
Absolutely.
And yet we don't hear about it over here very much.
Right.
We heard a lot about this one.
Right.
What made this different?
Okay, so a couple of things. Firstly, and that itself is a problem, that we don't hear of all the rapes and all the sexual violences that go on in India. And a lot of this, a lot of the rapes that happen and sexual violences are a little bit different from this one, in the sense that they're often systematic punishment meted out to women, particularly of lower classes, of ethnic minorities, for defying men of higher social classes. This happens on a systematic basis, and we need to talk about this a lot more, and this is not talked about. The reason why this took a life of its own, first, I think, a lot of women, we've pondered exactly this question, why this one? And I think sometimes there are moments in history we cannot fully understand why they take off in a certain way. But second, I think that it happened in Delhi, and not even in a suburb of Delhi, in the heart of Delhi, near one of the biggest universities. And the focus that the young people quickly brought to it, and the brutality. I think all of these factors joined, and plus the 24/7 electronic media, which women protesters did not enjoy before, but it seems to be working for them now.
Because in previous cases, it would happen, but then, as often happens with disasters in the news, people move on.
Yes.
People are not moving on here.
No.
The protests continue.
Well, the protests are really, really important to understand. I mean, this is the question we've been asking. Why is everybody protesting this? Now, in part because it has been kind of really contagious, that some people's protests have brought out some other people. But in another way, what this has brought to light is this the kind of contradiction that 21st century India has become. We have cities which are wonderful in terms of infrastructure, and they're absolute failures in terms of safety for women, in terms of what it means for public space. Now the young people who you see protesting, and they're really very, very young people, I think for a long time, because they are also the relatively privileged, they did not pay so much attention to these other aspects of India's economic growth, which they need in order to live the life they want. And this horror, this brutality, I think, brought home the point to too many people at the same time that there is something else we need to fight for. Only the shopping malls, only the luxury cars are not going to give us the kind of life we really want.
Many people, rightly or wrongly, may have taken some comfort in the fact that this happened on the other side of the world in a developing country, and therefore they feel it couldn't happen here like that, so we're a little, not smug, but we're allowed to feel a little better than that. Do you think that's an appropriate response?
No, I think it's really counterproductive on a number of levels. First of all, it's really othering it, right? It makes the folks in India look backward. It also imagines that there's one culture in India, that the culture in Delhi is the same culture as the culture in a small village town or in Bombay or wherever else, right? So we have to not imagine that India itself is a monolith. And then we also have to take a look at our own business, right? So every culture is different. I'm not saying that the culture in Delhi, we have the exact same problems around gender and sexual violence as we do here, but they sure have a lot in common. We have an epidemic of sexual violence right here in North America, and it has to do with impunity. It has to do with us constantly blaming the victim, and it has to do with us, not taking the crime seriously here in the U.S. and in Canada. So there's a lot in common, and we certainly don't have anything to be proud of. We know that about 1 in 5 women in North America in her life is going to be the victim of sexual assault, right? What does that tell you? That is, in fact, an epidemic. If 1 in 5 women in North America was being carjacked or kidnapped or even getting the flu, we would say, hey, that's an epidemic. Why aren't we doing more about it? And then as to his argument that it's rape in the West is universally seen as something horrible and is held to account, well, I mean, I wish that were true. I would love to live in that world. We see cases all the time. Right here in the U.S. in Steubenville, Ohio, there's an ongoing case where this girl was drugged and carried from party to party while being raped and violated in ways that I don't want to describe on air by members of the vaunted football team, right? And there's been a huge cover-up in the town because they don't want to disrupt this football team. The same is true in Notre Dame, the U.S. school that just played in the big college championship last night, they have several students who on the football team who are raping with impunity because they're football stars. We have cases in Winnipeg in 2011, a judge in a case where the jury found that a rape occurred refused to give the rapist a sentence because the woman was wearing sexy clothes and had flirted with him. So, and you know, I could go on. I could take up all of your airtime with examples of rape not being taken seriously right here on our own soil.
We were talking about rape, and then you said 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted. And we should not, I presume I'm on solid ground here when I say we shouldn't conflate the two. They're not the same thing. Is that right?
You know, it's difficult. Some studies separate them out, some of them keep them together. So that's why we have approximate numbers. Sexual assault includes violations that aren't defined legally as rape. Rape almost always includes penetration of some kind. And even the definitions of rape vary from sort of jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But sexual assault doesn't mean somebody whistled at you on the street. It's a serious bodily sexual violation, and it's on a continuum of sexual violence against women. I don't think that those two phenomena are separate. It's a question of degree and the actual action that was taken.
Okay, you'll forgive me. I don't know the study you're referring to when you say 1 in 5 women in North America are sexually assaulted. How do we know that?
We know that from social science research. We certainly don't know that from reporting because we know that this is a US number, about 54% of rapes go unreported here in the US, right? So we know that from researchers talking to women, talking to men also, because men also can be victims of sexual violence. It's slightly different than the topic we're talking about tonight, but I want to include that. And asking about their history with sexual violence and getting reports directly from people. So surveys that are scientifically constructed.
As we suggested earlier this evening was your first, I guess, road test of this new speech that you are giving across the province. It's called When the Money Runs Out. In a nutshell, what's the message?
Ontario's in a mess. There have been deliberate decisions made by the current government that made the hole even deeper. But you know what? There's hope on the way. We can get ourselves out of this, and we put a plan forward to help us get jobs back to our province and the books back in balance to protect the things we care about.
What do you hope to accomplish with this new, is it a PowerPoint presentation?
Well, I don't know if that's the exact program we're using, but more or less. So,
okay.
You and I have talked about this before. I did town halls across the province, 50-some in the big cities like Toronto, small towns, Northern Ontario. Talked about my vision for a strong Ontario, where it's the best public services, a strong economy, best place to set up a business. How do we get there? Got feedback from people, so now I'm going back out with a bigger show. So it's a multimedia presentation that illustrates where we are today when it comes to our finances, the state of our economy, how we got here, because if we want to give a prescription for the ailment, we have to understand the diagnosis to begin with. And then how do you get out of the hole? How can Ontario bounce back? And I have a strong sense of optimism we can do that. I mean, that's been our history. We can dust ourselves off, we can climb out of the hole, we can move forward. Decisions are out there. They're tough decisions, but we can move forward. If
the Liberals adopt some of the ideas that you're talking about, those tougher decisions, should we leave them in and let them do it?
Well, let's see exactly what they bring forward. And I guess in a couple of areas there's been some small responses. I mean, I feel proud that members of my team with their white papers, Passive Prosperity, are driving an agenda of change in the province. But when I listen to what the Liberal leadership candidates are talking about, I'm not seeing much change at all. They talk about communicating better or listening. They don't seem to understand the challenges that we face and how serious a problem is. Nor does there seem to be a recognition that it was decisions to increase taxes, drive up hydro rates, to try to appease public sector unions by giving them pretty well what they asked for that got us into the hole.
Not this last time. Not Bill 115.
Well, it was a habit pretty tough to break. I mean, you look at here's a case in point. I'll hit that and I'll get back to the other point I was going to make. You raised Bill 115. Well, I mean, it's a creature of necessity. As you know, we called for an across-the-board wage freeze for all of us in the broader public sector, so teachers, doctors, us as MPPs. I think that was a better approach. Nonetheless, we did support the bill because at least it was a step in the right direction. But how did we get here? I mean, education spending has gone up by $8.5 billion. We have 250,000 fewer students in our schools. So more money, fewer kids, and our test results have flatlined at best. They've actually declined in mathematics. Now we have chaos in our schools, so it's not exactly been much of an accomplishment.
Chaos in the schools? Chaos?
Well, we got threats of strikes again on Friday.
Yeah.
We've got withdrawal of activities across the province.
No extracurriculars, I know, but we get the highest test scores in the English-speaking world, too.
Well, actually, I'm very concerned that our scores internationally have plateaued, if not declined, relative to countries we're going to have to take on and compete with in the time ahead. The one point I want to get back to when you ask about the Liberal leadership contenders, I guess the one thing I've seen in moving away from the McGuinty agenda, it seems like if they're going in any direction, they're trying to get back in a close relationship with the public sector union leadership. And I worry what that means. I worry that's a signal that they plan to open the floodgates of spending. And they had a mutually beneficial relationship. The union supported the government in elections. The government then supported the unions in contract negotiations for some time. Unfortunately, it wasn't beneficial to taxpayers. We can't afford it. I'm worried they're signaling they're going back to that method.
Let's spend a bit of time now on something you just touched on a second ago, but I really want to understand it better, and that is what you talked about at your Board of Trade speech yesterday, this notion of creating a culture of enterprise that you think should permeate through government, through the private sector, through non-governmental organizations. What are you talking about there?
What I'm talking about is getting an idea that is new to actually take place. I think we all know what needs to get done. We've talked about community care and health care. The question is, how are we going to implement it, and how do we free people up to do that? And then what have we done to this latest generation of young people, where we've all tried to raise our kids up, make them safe and so on? We've ironed some of the initiative out of them, and we want to put that back into our educational institutions. Our colleges can be pretty good at it, but our universities need to be there too. We need to get enterprising happening as it is at places like Ryerson University, where kids are building enterprises while they're going to school. And that's not going to change the flavor of all of education, but it's going to start to get us to stop taking things for granted, because we're on the cusp of not giving the next generation the same opportunities we've had. We have used up our natural resource advantage. We've used up our dollar advantage. We now have to create a new people potential advantage. It's only going to come if we push ourselves. And so enterprising is about making permission to do well, also sometimes to fail. But it has to find its way into government. Government has got to start to become a competitive advantage. And frankly, our businesses have to be a little bit more enterprising too. I mean, entrepreneurship is associated with businesses, but we've got to start seeing them generate jobs and services rooted in this province. That's what we ask in return for the kind of supports that we've been giving, is that we get some of those good paying jobs happening here that are sustainable, that have a prospect of growing and so forth. And so we've got to create, I think, a general culture. What I like about the idea when I'm promoting it is because I don't think we're ever going to have the sort of rock and roll, shoot 'em, toot 'em, whatever culture of the States of entrepreneurship. But I think enterprising in the public interest, if we can extend a kind of an appreciation for it in all sectors, that can be an Ontario way of going about things.
Can you give me an example of how it would work in the public sector?
Well, for example, when we did education, we were able to get teachers and education workers focused on an agenda. They got 38% increases in test scores in reading, writing, and mathematics, a 50% reduction in test scores. And before we got started, they weren't even convinced that that was the way to focus educational efforts. But there are 25,000 more kids every year that have a chance of going forward as a result of that. We didn't pay that much more. So to me, it's a transformational kind of change when you get people doing the right thing by inspiration or by just a strategic insight, or sometimes just getting out of their way and letting them do that. So it's putting an accent on that as the way of getting things done, because we frankly don't have the money to make the other kinds of ways of, well, we don't need that inspiration to be at the center of it.
As long as we're on the subject of education, let's talk about the teachers.
Yeah.
How do you want to repair your party's relationship with the teachers?
Well, I think the only way to do that is to step forward a bit conciliatory and say, look, there are other ways to do this. And yes, that's what many teachers were saying all along. It's not about anything but a better arrangement for students, for the public, and for teachers and educators. And I always believe that could be done at negotiation. I think what happened is this negotiation got off the rails and was very hard to put back on. I think as a new person coming in, as someone who originated the four-year arrangements and the first province-wide deals, I think I can have some of the credibility to make that happen. And it's what people deserve. They don't need the government distracted by conflict. They don't need the schools to be places where anything's been denied. I think the students deserve every option and every advantage they can get. And there is, for 8.5 and 9 years, there was a very fundamental good working relationship, probably better between any government and teachers anywhere in North America.
Because there was money.
No, not at all.
You guys were given 3% a year.
I dispute that entirely. The first deal was 2.5 Sorry, 2, 2, 2.5, and 3, less than the industrial average. It paid for 6,000 new teachers, the money we saved in that deal. So, and then while the subsequent deal was a little bit more straightforward, it's still, you don't have a great big amount over inflation like you do in some other areas and some other settlements. So I want to just say that the working relationship, I think, was there in the outcomes that the OECD, Harvard University, the economists last week say are among the best in the English-speaking world. So there's an education advantage. It's been created in the last 9 years, and it's too important to lose.
Anthony, I want to find out more about a study that you were a part of that looked into people's homes. What exactly did you find?
Well, we found what you can only find when you go into families' homes and you see how they're actually interacting with their everyday objects. And so we did what no social science research has really done up to this point. And we moved away from looking at just what consumers are purchasing at the point of sale, looking at a broader consumer survey kind of and self-report data. So we went into their homes and we did it with a series of ethnographic and archaeological methods. And so we systematically counted every object in 32 families' homes in the western United States. And we saw something that was really quite extraordinary. I think perhaps one of the most salient points to make is that the average American middle class household has more objects per household than any other typical household in all of global history. It's an extraordinary amount of stuff, and people are struggling to deal with the sheer quantity of things that are in their homes. Garages were rarely used to park a car, for example. These objects just consolidated, accrued over time. I think with the expectation that people would get rid of it at some point. But Andrea talked a little bit about sort of unfettered consumption lack, and there's some discussion about people's inability to perhaps really reflect on the decisions that underlie purchases, that underlie particular consumer behavior. I think you gain that perspective when you step out of your typical everyday life and you walk into someone else's house with an eye toward what it is that they have. And anthropologists are quite good at this. We like to look at that which is familiar and evaluate it for how unfamiliar it is. And what we found is that most families that participated in our study really hadn't come to grips with the sheer volume of things that were in their home.
Well, not only that, Jill, the one thing that the pictures that we just saw screamed out at us was that people clearly don't value open space in their living areas. Why do they not seem to prize that value?
Well, you know what? I believe that, and I say this all the time, people let their stuff own them. And I always say, own your stuff, don't let your stuff own you. It feels very much like a buffet or a dinner party where the hostess says, or all this food is free. You can have this, and we feel the need because it's free or it's cheap or we paid to take it, to eat it, to, you know what I mean, take it in. So if it comes in the house, it's hard to get rid of it. So we feel the need to keep it around.
I think one of the things that we've seen change, I mean, Bruce said earlier, consumption's been around since the earliest trading periods. And then leisure consumption has been, as soon as we could afford it and wanted to demonstrate stuff to other people, we consumed. What's changed now is not just planned obsolescence, but technology changes, and the notion that there's constant change means I buy for the moment, not for a planned utilization over a period in time. So people's planning horizons or buying horizons is satisfies me now and when I get home for a brief period in time, and I'll worry about what happens after that. The fact that it's stored, I think, is the really interesting thing, because that says that people occasionally want to go back and say, oh, let me recapture that memory when I had that. We know in business and a whole bunch of areas, it's very hard for people to stop doing things. And that's one of the interesting connections here.
You know, it's true to say that the business of innovation is about, to quote Deming, the ongoing creation of dissatisfaction. You know, he coined that phrase in the 1920s. This is the man who gave us air conditioning in our cars. And so there's a certain, you know, kind of declared intent there on the part of marketing. But we also have to remember that that we don't have a well-developed secondary market for our possessions. You know, there's Kijiji and there's eBay and whatever, but we don't. And the reason for that is that there is some social capital It comes from having new stuff. And until the day comes when I can roll into your driveway in a 15-year-old car and earn your admiration, or wear my dad's overcoat and earn your admiration, I'm not likely to do those things.
So
I'm likely
you were
to be
looking for a paradigm change then in people's thinking.
right, driven by values, not by some economic structural, kind of revolution, but by what we think is important.
And Anthony, what about on that issue? In your experience, is the rest of the world catching up to North America in these bad habits?
I think eventually that will happen unless there's a major philosophical reorientation, and frankly I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. There was mention of a secondary market. I think Bruce mentioned secondary market as sort of not really being developed, the Craigslist, the eBay, for a place where we can get rid of the innumerable possessions that we accumulate in these very large houses. Americans have some of the largest houses in the world, and these are really, really big containers which we can pack full of stuff without really feeling any major consequences in the immediate. And so there's this material myopia, if you will. But I think most families have good intentions of getting rid of stuff, and so Jill mentioned recycling, Bruce mentioned eBay and Craigslist, and so we squirrel things away, old furniture, old toys and notebooks, unused kitchen appliances, but they still function, and we form some relationship with these objects. It's not necessarily a deep relationship, but we know that there's value in that object. We've assigned some form of value, as ambiguous as it may be. I paid $50 for this object. I should be able to get $30 for that object if I were to sell it. And so we pack it away, and stuff is available quite inexpensively and cheaply. More stuff comes in than goes out. It accumulates. So the time comes around on Saturday when, say, you and your spouse and your kids are hanging out, and it's this small amount of leisure time that you have to enjoy. Do you clean out the garage? Do you clean out the basement? Do you sacrifice the small amount of time that you have to participate in an experience with your family for, sort of unloading some stuff? And I think that's the heart of the problem. Part of the problem is this culture of busyness, is we fully subscribe to a culture of busyness as a marker, as a measure of middle-class success and prestige. And that absence of leisure time is hurting us in the long run. We found among Los Angeles families that despite having invested in, quite lovely outdoor spaces, backyard spaces, and an otherwise Mediterranean environment that you can almost enjoy outside year-round, that families and children were scarcely in these spaces, and instead were inside among their stuff.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website. That's theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.